So, Michelle.
So, David.
Exciting day today.
I don't know. Is it? Because I've seen what you're wearing. I'm not that excited.
Look, I'm really sorry, but I've blown a meniscus and it's really important that I keep my legs loose, which is why I'm wearing cargo.
I know. He literally has boomer dad vibes. I'm so glad that this is just an audio situation.
Yeah, well, let's be perfectly honest. I am nothing but a boomer dad. We have a guest.
Oh, my God. This is so good because I don't have to just talk to you.
I mean, you look fabulous. You're in your sartorial elegance.
I just did TV, so you know.
And I just schlep in looking like a dad.
Yes.
And we've got a big special guest.
A big special guest.
And it's a really special guest.
Okay.
Because we've talked about Ukraine and Russia quite a lot. But this time we've got somebody that's actually been there.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, I'm really thrilled with this. Ooh, can you tell I'm excited?
Can you just calm down?
My shorts are puffing up.
Stop it. You're listening to I Spy, the embedded journalist of Australian intelligence.
I'm looking for the president.
Okay.
A friend of the president.
Okay.
Just don't tell any spies that I'm looking for the president.
Okay. And you are?
I'm an Australian. I'm a journalist.
Okay.
Truly.
Okay. Hello and welcome to I Spy. My name is Michelle Stevenson. I'm here with David Callan and we do have a very special guest and I'm very excited to welcome Misha, who has a podcast himself called Diplo Mates.
Misha Zelinsky. Zelinsky, let me get it correct, because Zelensky is the name of the president. Zelinsky is the name of the journalist and Fulbright scholar. Did you know that?
Oh, no, I didn't.
There you go. He's smarter than us.
I mean, it's not difficult to be smarter than you, but anyway. Well, welcome, Misha. We're so happy to have you here.
Great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm not sure I'm smarter than anybody in this room, but perhaps better dressed, but you know, that's we'll leave that to the public to decide.
Definitely better dressed.
I'm
Definitely.
going to take a photo of these shorts and post them on our Twitter feed at I Spy Podcast, and if you don't like them, well, suck out.
No, I think we need to do a poll on our Twitter feed to see who actually likes them. No one will. So we're going to do that as well.
Before we go any further, do we remember the old thing you used to get when you got on a train called MX, that free newspaper?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And they used to have that thing about people seen on the train.
Yep.
Right. And there was one, and it was my students that showed it to me. They went, "You've made MX." I went, "What are you talking about?" I went, "Look, on the seen on the train column." And it had the guy down at Circular Quay wearing the 3/4 length camo pants. You ruined my day.
Oh my God. And so you kept them and you bring them out on special occasions. I'm so honoured. You must be honoured, Misha.
Oh, look, it's a great thrill to see the white pointers out on display, mate. So.
Well, there's sun. We haven't seen it in so long, and nor have my legs. Misha.
Yes.
How long has it been since you've been back from the Ukraine?
Just under 3 weeks.
Oh my God, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
All right, now I'm shocked.
Fresh off the boat.
Indeed.
Yeah.
What, you have a Ukrainian background?
Russian-Ukrainian family.
Russian-Ukrainian family, but Australian-based, obviously.
Yeah, so post-World War II migrants.
Yeah, okay. So when did you decide, there's a war going on, I've got to go and stand in the middle of it?
Well, I was there before the war started. So I flew into Ukraine, went to Kyiv when flights were still going on the 16th of February.
Yeah.
So I was there a few days before the hostilities broke out, covered the war for the first 2.5 months for the FIN, the Australian Financial Review, and then went back for a month in September, October.
So clearly you've been over there covering it. What has struck you most about the war and particularly the people as well?
Well, I think the bravery and resilience of the Ukrainian people surprised everybody. So it's easy to forget these things as we've gone along, but you go back to the beginning of the war, most people gave Ukrainians 24 hours to hold out.
I reckon roll of the dice would give you the number of days.
Well, indeed, right? So, you know, the fact that when you're sitting in Kyiv and the expectation from everyone was the city would fall in 24 hours or 72 hours or the president would be arrested, or killed in the first 24 or 36 hours, which the Russians did attempt. So they're still here, right? So we're at 250 odd days of the war, and they aren't just still here. They haven't just, I guess, withstood the attack. They are now winning the war on the ground. So
they're repelling it.
Well, indeed, right? So, and they're beating, one of what we believe to be one of the world's superpowers militarily, and perhaps the world's second most powerful military. Ukraine was a relative minnow, and so it's extraordinary effort when you consider the size and scale of the Russian forces, what they were up against. So the odds that they've been up against, so their ability to withstand that is extraordinary, and their bravery and their dignity in the worst of circumstances is really inspiring. When
you say that you were all sitting in cafes in Kyiv going, my God, we're going to be gone in 24 hours. Can you actually put your finger on a point where you felt that the morale change within, or the stoicism just sort of kick in with the Ukrainian people? Was it something Zelensky did? Was it just something like a communal moment where they went, no, we're not going to take this?
I think it's a combination of factors. So when I got there before the war started, it was very odd. So you're reading about this sense that there's 200,000 Russian troops arrayed on the north, east and south of the country. Inside the country couldn't have been more sort of, I guess, contrasted against that concern from outside. So, Zelensky, you remember going back to, was saying, please stop saying the Russians are going to invade. You're revving this thing up. And so there was this sense of, I don't know whether or not it was willful blindness or a sense of not wanting to rev the tensions up any further, but it was very muted inside the country. And also kind of like, when I was talking to my friends in Ukraine and saying, do you think there's going to be invasion? Oh, Misha, you guys are the crazy Westerners. It's not going to happen. Right? And so look, hoping for the best perhaps. And, then of course, Putin invaded, and the first 24 hours there was a sense of shock that it was actually happening. And it's important to remember that I think part of the reason why Ukrainians were perhaps lulled into a false sense of security is that Putin essentially had been at war with them for at least 8 years.
Yes.
Some would say centuries when you look at what's happened between Russia and Ukraine. But in terms of hostilities, there'd been conflict in the eastern part of Ukraine by so-called Russian separatists. But Russian
little green man.
Yeah, correct.
Yep.
In Donbass for 8 years, and the annexation in 2014, or the illegal annexation of Crimea. So that was the context. I think two things happened. One is Zelensky didn't leave.
Yeah.
And you can't quite put a price on that, but I often think about, look, if Winston Churchill left London in World War II during the Blitz, that
would have been a very different result.
Well, indeed, right? You can't quite put your finger on leadership in those moments, but Zelensky, he was being urged by everyone, including the Americans, saying, look, get out, go set up a government in exile, perhaps in Lviv or in Poland. He said, I don't need a riot, I need ammunition.
Which, to me...
legendary quote, right?
Yeah.
But you got to give it to the guy.
Well,
we've said this a number of times.
Right.
Don't think you can bluff a comedian. It's their job to stand in front of people and go, I'm smarter than you, I'm funnier than
Right.
you. Shut up and listen to me, because what
Right.
I'm going to say is more important than anything you can think of, or funnier than anything you can think of. I think there's certainly that amount of chutzpah in Zelensky, in that he went, no, I'm not walking away.
Well, right. And so he's taking videos of himself in the middle of Kiev saying, we're staying, I'm fighting, and, come get me sort of thing. And I think that Ukrainians, I want to speak to others that wondered what might happen. They themselves weren't sure whether or not they'd give in to the bully, as they have many, many times throughout the centuries of their history, or that they'd finally draw a line in the sand and stand and fight. And I think the president staying gives a lot of confidence. You contrast that against, not the same thing, but if you contrast that against what happened in Afghanistan, their president bailed out and the country disintegrated in a week.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, well, if the president leaves, he knows everything that's going on. If he's got no confidence that we can hang on here, then why would anybody else stay and fight? Now, Afghanistan, different situation, perhaps not the same sense of nationhood and identity, but nevertheless, most recent compare and contrast event. So Zelensky staying was a powerful thing. And the other thing, going back to what we're saying about expectations, the 24-hour thing. So Ukrainians, like, 24 hours, we're still here.
Yeah.
48 hours, we're still here.
Yeah.
A week, we're still here. And so actually, as the Russians started to labour and were unable to take Kyiv and take big parts of the country, that confidence continued to grow throughout. And so they drew confidence out of those low expectations. And
basically, they were sitting there going, I reckon we can make a week.
well, right.
2
Yeah.
weeks? Let's go for 2.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they won the battle for Kyiv was a definitive moment where the Russians then had to concede that they couldn't take Kyiv and regroup into the east, and the war's gone on from there. But that was the moment, I think, Zelensky, and the fact that the expectation was so low, and their bravery was extraordinary in those opening exchanges where essentially Ukraine was by itself. Now, the West was saying things like, "Oh, how dare you, Putin?" But the weapons weren't flowing, the sanctions weren't put in place. It was Ukrainian bravery that turned the whole thing around, and it's quite shameful, really, when you think about it, that NATO allies, Australia, not a NATO ally, but Western allies, sort of sat back and watched to see whether or not the Ukrainians could hang on. And once they did, well, maybe we can send them some weapons, or we can sanction Russia and all these things. It took Ukrainian bravery, literally, on the outskirts of their capital to hold on.
But I do think in some ways it is quite a complex situation, because if NATO allies jump in too quickly, we almost want to avoid this fallout with Russia, and that's kind of where we've sat. Now, how has that buoyed the Ukrainians in having that help and having that support? And also, was there a moment where they really did feel isolated?
So I think, Ukrainians know they can't win without Western support. They can't do it without weapons. They can't do it without Western money. So they know
Don't give
that.
me a lift, give me bullets.
Well, right. And so they're prepared to fight and die for their country and their freedom, but they know that they can't do it without steady supply. So that's in many ways what Putin's trying to do. Whilst he's trying to win the war on the ground, he's also trying to break Western will to continue to supply Ukraine. But at the beginning of the war, there was very much a sense that, I wrote about this quite a bit, is NATO coming to help us? And in those opening days, whilst they were fighting, there was a sense looking to European and the United States and others saying, well, are you coming? Now, of course, that was not going to happen for reasons that you've said in terms of West not wanting to get into a direct war with Russia and essentially triggering World War III. But that shifted to, okay, well, are you going to put a no-fly zone in place? This was a term, close the skies, because at the time the Russians had complete aerial superiority, and we talk about what's happened even today with bombings, missiles being sent into Kyiv and other parts of the country. Again, it's awful what we're seeing. But there was that ask. And again, when you break down what a no-fly zone is, essentially it's asking American jets to shoot down Russian jets. And again, you're
back into World War III.
So again, that was not really possible. So where they ended up settling on was, look, just give us the bloody weapons and we'll do this ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that now is the very clear ask, is they want more weapons and they need them a greater supply faster. In many ways, you look at it, we've gotten better and that we are giving them more things, and you're seeing the results on the ground, particularly with things like HIMARS, which really changed the battle.
That changed the game.
Hugely. But the capability is still far stronger on the Western side. It hasn't really been given everything that they could be given. And there's a frustration amongst Ukrainians that say, well, listen, look, we are not asking you to do anything other than give us weaponry, defensive and offensive weaponry. And they say, well, why does it always take something bad to happen for you to then send us, if it's HIMARS or if it's anti-aircraft or anti-missile technology. Bushmasters, all the things that are needed. Australia's the most popular brand now in Ukraine, would you believe it? The Bushmaster.
Yeah.
So there is a frustration. That's right. There is a frustration around the slowness, and not often you'll see words don't necessarily match actions, particularly countries like Germany where they promise certain things and then, the feet drag. So there's a degree of appreciation for that support, but frustration around the scope, scale and speed.
Can we get more?
Right. Yeah, and I think what we're doing is right, and I do think we probably could, make that flow a little bit easier in some regards. But in some respects, we've seen America particularly jump into these wars, and they've never turned out well. Not for the rest of the world. We've seen, they've taken people out, they've put people in. And I think it's a really fine line. And in some ways, we have to almost let it kind of play out.
Well, one of the interesting points you made there is America jumps into a war, which is true, they do. And I mean, when people say, how dare Russia invade Ukraine? Well, how dare America invade Iraq? All right. They're two sides of the same coin. But the interesting thing is, because of the NATO affiliation, America is kind of locked in.
They are.
So the great example was the missile that landed in Poland. Now, some people said it was a Ukrainian missile that landed in Poland. Other people are saying it could be a Russian missile in Poland.
Was it Russian?
Well, there's talk about that, which is basically they're using the wrong kind of missile. They're using an anti-air missile as a ground missile, so it's inaccurate. And it was close to a target within Ukraine. But the interesting point that was made was the fact that the Russians said that NATO want to have a war with us and we're going to stop it by not letting them into Ukraine. Now, if NATO wanted a war with Russia, right now would be the time to start one.
Right.
And they had the perfect excuse with a missile landing in a NATO nation. It's doctrine not to go to war with Russia. That's NATO's doctrine. It's like, whatever happens, don't go to war with Russia, because they got more nukes than anybody else.
But I almost think we don't need to go to war with Russia, because what we're seeing right now is the fall of Putin. He has proved that he is not as strong as everyone thought he was, and he's doing his best to save face, and he's not saving face. The Ukrainians are gaining ground in the battleground, and that has to be messing with him. He would be fucking furious.
It's undoubtedly terrible what you've seen on the ground there for Putin. He's been completely humiliated. If you look at whatever his objectives were, if it was stopping the expansion of NATO, well, NATO's expanded through Finland and Sweden, right?
Yeah.
It was unthinkable for them to join. Now I'm a unionist, right? So it's unsurprising if you sit there and scratch your head and say, well, what's the countries that Putin won't invade? Well, they're NATO countries. Yep. We should probably join NATO, right? Strength in numbers.
Yeah.
So NATO hasn't expanded in a very long time. It's now expanded, right? The West has never been more unified. He was having a lot of success at pulling, strings or on the threads of Western unity, and people say, well, we've probably got to trade with Russia on energy, etc. Now you're seeing the complete banning of these things in terms of diplomacy, trade, etc. So it's destroyed his economy, it's destroyed his prestige. And the thing that's most important to him is looking strong, and his military's been completely humiliated. In terms of your point about whether or not there'd be a war with, now you don't want to ever see a war, but right now he's flat out trying to invade Ukraine. You couldn't imagine that he would have any realistic expectation of invading Europe. We should draw confidence from that. But in terms of what the West should be doing at this point, I think in many ways what got us into this point is really not, indulging bad behaviour.
Yeah, I agree.
Bad behaviour has been indulged from Putin for 20 years, be it meddling in elections, meddling in Brexit, meddling in the United States elections, extraterritorial killings
He's been
in the United Kingdom. Yeah. Right. The illegal annexation in 2014.
Yes.
So he thought to himself, why wouldn't I try this on? We've just seen the the Western allies, the United States, withdraw from Afghanistan, he thought to himself, NATO's a paper tiger.
Yeah.
And so Putin's not a great strategist. A lot of people say he's playing 3D chess and we're playing checkers. I actually don't think he's like that at all. He's actually a gambler.
Yeah, I would say that.
And a gambling man doesn't always win. He goes all in and he waits for the West to fold.
He's trying to bluff everyone.
And he always tries to up the stakes.
Yeah.
That's what nuclear threats are about. All these things are about essentially hoping that we will all blink and give in. So, I actually think you can break this down in one of two ways. On the one hand, you can say this is just a conflict between two countries very far away from Australia, certainly very far away from, not every European nation, but certainly located in one part of the world. But you actually look at it a little more deeply. Australia's a country of 25 million people. We're a democracy. We need our friends. There are countries around the world that mean us harm, and they don't like democracies such as ours. And so if a democracy like Ukraine is prepared to stand and fight against a big autocratic bully and have success, I think we should invest in that success and help them get that success as quick as possible.
Yes.
Because a grinding long fight in Ukraine is in no one's interest. And, over a long period of time, the Russians can probably just force their sheer weight of numbers onto the Ukrainians. So I think whilst Ukraine has its tail up and they are winning on the ground, I think we should help that along.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're seeing it as well, the way it affects us through inflation and energy prices. It's definitely hitting a lot of the Western countries hard.
Yeah.
Now, how important has social media been in this campaign? We've spoken about this a lot, and it kind of is what I think has been getting at Vladimir Putin because, before he had control of all media, and now everything is kind of getting through. And then, Ukrainians, Elon Musk kind of provided Starlink as well, so gave them a few more capabilities. How important has the social media presence been?
Extremely. I think probably one of the most underreported or least understood or underappreciated elements of the war. It's like the first smartphone war.
Yeah.
And so you've had this live stream of data, or visual data coming out of the war zone in a way that previously we never would have gotten. It also, I think, what's quite interesting is you've got this compare and contrast between the two leaders, Zelensky and Putin. Zelensky's an entertainer, going back to your point.
He's so good at it.
He understands entertainment mediums. He understands how to inform and use all the tools at his disposal. So he's in many ways like an avatar of his people and his country. And
also his generation.
And his generation, that's right.
He's a modern leader. He's a new modern leader.
Yeah.
That's right. And so Putin, on the other hand, has been the master of misinformation using the traditional system. So they've got the Russia Today, and they're very good at manipulating traditional media.
Yeah.
And they're very good at understanding the links between traditional media and social media. But what they're not good at through that top-down approach is getting user-generated content. And so coming back to that point I was making about the Ukrainians not really wanting to get into this scrap at the beginning with Russia, once it happened, the explosion of Ukrainian identity online, and you got 45 million advocates that are following their president and creating this surge of content. And so the unbelievable way that there's this ecosystem of individuals, 45 million Ukrainians and those around the world in the diaspora selling this message, but also how quick they are centrally as well. Their government, government can move very slowly.
Oh, glacially.
Right, but I know the guys that run some of these accounts, like Defense of Ukraine, which is a huge Twitter account, and they just troll the Russians all the time. That was one example. They were like, "Hey, Crimea, what's going on? See you soon," right? And they got Crimea tweeting back saying, "Oh, it's been a bit lonely down here," or something to that effect. And so
drinks,
right, that type of stuff, and it's engaging, and so it's a way to sell this message of, why does this stuff matter, and why should we care about Ukraine? So they got to keep people actively interested because there's so much happening in the world that things can drop down the order of priority over time. So that's one of the challenges, but I think social media is critical and one of the least understood parts. Yeah,
and I think the immediacy as well. Like I'm an avid Twitter user, but the immediacy of like seeing images come from the ground. When there was big shelling one day, you saw like a young girl who was holding her phone, and like you saw her literally just miss her, and she's bloodied and stuff like that. I think images like that are what kind of solidify. It's basically how the Vietnam War was kind of lost in terms of a mindset.
We've gone from the here are the boys storming the beaches in Normandy
exactly
to journalists that just give them free rein.
But even everyday people having being able to on TikTok and, all of that stuff.
And that's the evolution of it is, we had the journalists, that incredible shot of the guy being killed in the street, shot in the head by the Vietnamese army. There's that image. And then we went to embedding journalists in Iraq, the first and second Iraq wars. And now it's like, we're all carrying studios in our pockets. So suddenly we're not only shooting stuff, we're producing
and that's
then
why
getting it out and distributing.
That's right, exactly. And that effect, what I've been saying, we've had this perverse situation with social media and its impact on the truth. And the Russians have really leaned into that over the last 10 years in terms of, they don't care about creating any sort of facts. They just want to create 100 different truths.
Yeah.
And once you do that, then anything could be possible. And then you become
create
cynic.
dissent.
And cynicism.
Yeah.
Because you say, well, I don't know. Maybe nothing's true. Everything's true. I don't know, right?
Well, I mean, they were the ones, we spoke about this recently, but they're the ones who, created this dissent and this idea of like questioning government during COVID. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like because they had a lot of troll accounts on Twitter
100%.
and Facebook.
So they're masters of that. But what you've had with this situation with 45 million Ukrainians with phones in their pockets showing what's happening on the ground, facts have made a kind of a comeback in the war. And, Putin can spin it all he wants, but the brutality of what you're seeing on the ground where there's missile strikes in a city and immediately you see the consequences and people can show literally right there and then what's happening. I was able to do that myself. And, you see, horrific images and these war crimes, and that's what they are, coming in live, real time. The Vietnam stuff was incredibly powerful, but it was slower, right? So this is happening in real time. So the Ukrainians are masterful at moving at the speed that the mediums move at, and they're wrong footing the Russians. And the first time in a long time, the Russian misinformation machine has been outplayed. It's a kind of interesting thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the turning points for me when I was following this was when they'd captured a couple of Russian soldiers and they gave them a cup of tea and they offered them to use their phones to call their parents and watching them cry. And these Russians were telling them, we didn't know where we were going. We didn't know what we were doing. And it was that moment of humanity that you saw. And I think that really played well into the Ukrainian mindset. Like we are humane. We're not going to do the things that the Russian forces are doing. Have you spoken to many Russians who have been captured or Russian soldiers, and what is the feeling for them?
Well, I mean, look, it's a difficult thing because right now it's a pretty clear line between what's happening between Ukraine and Russia and which is the the good side and the bad side, really. Yeah. We really haven't had this clear a good and evil conflict in our lifetime, certainly, really since World War II, probably, when you break it down. So my contact with Russians is minimal because, unsurprisingly, I'm a big critic of the regime and they're not going to be wanting to talk to me. I'm sanctioned by Putin, right?
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, I'm on the list with 128 other Aussies. But
welcome.
No,
I'm not on that list.
No, well,
we keep waiting.
It's just on it. Well, maybe now I've been on here, you guys should get added. But you hang out with my dishonourable self. But look, I think, when you look at any country, I had on my podcast a woman by the name of Evgenia Karamutsa. Now, she's the wife of a Russian dissident, dissident politician. And he was brave enough to go back there when the war started, knowing full well that he'd be arrested for critiquing the war or the so-called special operation, which you get 15 years. So there are, obviously, it's a big country with diverse views. But right now, you've got a regime there that's completely corrupted, redundant, disgraceful, and creating war crimes. So, look, I think the difficulty in Russia right now is if you are a dissenter, it's basically impossible to dissent. And otherwise, you got to support the regime, which is what the majority are doing.
But you see like those images of when he did the conscription and Russian men trying to flee the country, literally. And I would imagine that for me, the perception is it's not always so cut and dry because there's a lot of Russians who don't want this man in and don't know how to fight or how to stand up because they've never had to before. And I would imagine it would be a really interesting dichotomy of hate Russia, but there's also these people that we're fighting who don't want to be here either.
Oh, look, there's an extreme human cost on both sides. And look, to be a dissenter in Russia is basically asking either for a death sentence or a life sentence, right? So it is very difficult to do it. And Putin is completely crushed dissent, political dissent. And there were protests at the beginning of the war and all those people essentially got rounded up and thrown into jail. There's no independent media really to speak of and there's no political opposition to speak of. So the consequences for speaking out are very, very high and Russia's hard to do. So you did see people fleeing the country, though if I was a skeptic, I'd say they didn't flee the country until they were called up to fight.
Yeah, right.
So they were happy to see other people fight for them. Or, and the Russians as well, when you look at their conscription model, they tend to conscript ethnic minorities to go fight.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of footage coming out of places like Kazakhstan or not those sort of regions.
Areas,
the more eastern regions, they were just basically pulling trucks up, getting guys in and driving them away.
Yeah. So Putin is very reluctant to call up his supporter base in St. Petersburg and Moscow. He doesn't like to mobilize ethnic Russians, though he had no choice on this occasion. There was a 300,000 call up. But broadly speaking, Russians are quite happy when others are fighting and dying for them in the name of Mother Russia. But it was interesting that they didn't flee at the beginning. They fled once.
It's a very valid point. Absolutely.
So you got to have some degree of skepticism about that. But at the same time, of course, there are plenty of Russian dissidents inside Russia and around the world that would love to see Vladimir Putin go. And, we've got to hope that they are able to, in the end, one day they will be free and they will be democratic, but it's just a question of when and how.
There's also the problem that you have is if at some point Putin is brought down, what replaces him?
Well, yes.
That void is a really scary void.
Well, that is a good question to talk about, because the biggest critics of Putin right now, to your point, are not the dissidents saying we want peace. It's actually people to his right saying he's not going hard enough.
Yeah.
That he's not brutalising Ukrainians even further, which is extraordinary to think about, but not using nuclear weapons. And so that is scary, because he's unleashed this Russian nationalism and this hawkishness and the belief that if you truly believe that Russia is facing an existential threat from the West and at the moment the war's going badly, then, and you truly believe that,
double down.
Well, right.
Yeah.
And so, Putin's maybe more cynical than that. I don't know. We don't know what's in his mind. Does he truly believe his own propaganda? But that is to his right. There is that risk of worse people coming after Putin. And then, even you take a guy like Navalny, he's perhaps the great hope of the side, but he's a Russian nationalist himself. He believes he supports the Crimea annexation. Now, he's against the war right now.
Yeah.
But, he's a nationalist. What he is an anti-corruption nationalist.
Yeah,
but,
that doesn't really play well in Kremlin right now.
Well, right. But it's interesting. There is this stream, the Russians, whilst any country is a dictatorship, still has politics, right?
Yeah.
And so the stream in Russia of this nationalist streak is probably more potent, but exists in the same way it exists in the United States or in Australia or other Western countries, right? So guys like Navalny are very much still playing to that audience. They're not. We shouldn't dream that there's a JFK coming through. There's
no great white hope.
Well, perhaps not. They're there, but they've been marginalised. Guys like Nemtsov were killed. So that Western liberal style democracy movement doesn't exist inside Russia right now in any meaningful sense.
It doesn't really exist in a lot of places, and every time we've seen,
that's true.
Every time we've seen Americans try to fix it, it's ended up being worse.
But that's also a really interesting point that's always made. Is we have a tendency to go, well, why aren't they just like us? Why can't they be democratic like us? Why can't they be a liberal democracy, and be good and nice and pure? And that's just not the way.
Well, look at America at the moment. What kind of democracy are they living in?
Yeah, well, sometimes even train wrecks have got to have a time sometime. But I think...
Well, it's Winston Churchill, right? It's the worst system apart from every other system. I'd rather live in... the United States...
The best of the worst choice.
Well, indeed. The United States has plenty of problems, right? And we can go there and, I can hand-wring all day about the state of the United States democracy, but...
We'll have you on for another episode. We'll just call it the hand.
We need 5 hours. But
let's just do a series.
But, the good thing about democracy is that it's self-correcting.
Yes.
And so when you saw the United States make a mistake, in my opinion, and we touched on it around the Iraq war, you got Barack Obama elected and, slowly unstitching those wars. You got Trump, then you got Biden. These things can be corrected. Russia has had Putin for 20 years, marinating in his own paranoia and his own grievances, and everyone has to say, good job, boss, right?
Yeah.
And, ultimately, there's 1,000 people in Russia that run Russia. 999 know the war's going terribly, except one bloke who they can't tell, right? Otherwise, get thrown out of a window, quite literally.
You're going to do the same thing as every other oil executive.
Right. Well, right, exactly. So the fact of the matter is that
just
lack
don't
of
walk past windows.
That's right. Exactly right.
Stay on the ground floor.
There's no self-corrective mechanism, and I think that's the important thing. There's no feedback loop for leaders.
Yeah.
And that's why Putin, in many ways, invaded, because he believed his own hype.
Yeah.
Or if you're England, there's too much feedback. Your letters.
Who's the Prime Minister this afternoon?
It is an interesting point, though. When you look at Truss, she's come up with this crazy plan. She got mugged by... look, I'm a Labor man, as people would know, but it's ironic to see the Tories getting mugged by the capital markets. But nevertheless...
the capital markets will mug anyone.
Well, right, but it is self-correcting. She's come up with a policy that's unsustainable. It's gone in 45 days. Now... Had she been the head of Russia, she probably doubles down on that for 20 years.
Yeah.
So it is an interesting example.
Absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely
the instability
right.
is not good, but it is an interesting if you compare and contrast the way that those systems can squeeze out bad leaders and bad ideas faster.
Look at how many leaders we went through in a 8-year period. We went through quite a few.
It was good. We went shopping. Bit of window shopping.
Let's try that guy. No, let's try that guy.
No, I don't like that one.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the voters didn't get to decide enough of those.
No, exactly. I think that's part of the problem.
Point is, I think that if you put it in the Australian context, we watched what happened in the last sort of decade.
We vote for a party, not a leader.
Yeah, we vote for a party, not a leader. So there was a lot of that, he's not my prime minister stuff, but, understand your political system.
But a lot of people don't
With
understand
Russia,
the political system.
You don't vote for him, but you still get him.
Well, I think
99%.
110% of voters supported Vladimir Putin at the last election.
Yeah,
right?
I know. Their polling is always out weirdly. You're like, oh, that doesn't even make sense.
Oh, look, I mean, look, the thing about Russian polling where they say, and people go, oh, 85% of Russians support the invasion. Well, two things. One, I mean, if you believe the numbers, you're going to be kidding yourself. But secondly, if someone rang you and said, do you support this invasion? You didn't. You'd be very brave to say no, because you'd be getting a knock on the door shortly thereafter, say, right this way, sir, right? So, look, the Russian numbers are ridiculous. You saw that even with these sham referenda where allegedly 98% of Ukrainians voted to join Russia, and then a couple hours later, Ukrainians are pulling down the Russian flags and putting up the Ukrainian flags.
I know,
so
it clearly
couldn't
not.
even militarily control areas they next, which is the kind of bungling nature of the Russians right now.
So
and there's poor Vlad sitting in his office going, but they all want me.
Well, indeed.
So being on the ground, what was it like visually? I would imagine like it would be such a visceral experience in terms of what's happened to the landscape.
Yeah, it really is heartbreaking, especially the further you get south and east. I just travelled right around the southeast of the country, went down to like Mykolaiv and Dnipro, went out to Bakhmut. Some of these places have been literally
Decimated.
destroyed with beyond recognition. Zelensky describes them as dead cities, and they are just rubble. But even major cities, it's quite normal. You'd be walking along and there's a out of nowhere a building with a huge missile hole in it, or rubble. The Ukrainians are very good at repairing things.
Yes.
So there was that big missile attack that I was there. I think it was October 11 from memory. I might have that wrong, but
like 40 missiles dropped in.
Yeah, right in Kyiv. It was 80 across the country, but most of them went into Kyiv, and they'd patched up the roads and got everything moving again within like 48 hours.
Yeah.
So it was quite extraordinary, the efforts, the way that they are reconstructing on the move. But unfortunately, you can smash things faster than you can rebuild them, and that's sort of what Putin's doing. And that's the big regrettable thing here. And I've said this right since the beginning of the war, where it looked like it was pretty clear Putin wasn't going to win from, I thought, about day 5, but he can destroy Ukraine.
He just wants to destroy it.
He can destroy Ukraine while losing. And
He's
so
like,
what
if I can't have it, no one can.
Right. So these are, I describe them as the equivalent of a military temper tantrum.
Yep.
So he suffers a massive reversal. He loses Kherson, which is a huge humiliation.
Yeah.
It's a major city, the only one that he's really captured. And then the next day he fires, 80 missiles into the heart of Ukraine to destroy their energy infrastructure. Now, it doesn't change the facts on the ground. The facts on the ground remain that Ukraine's winning.
Yeah.
But it makes Ukraine
makes a mess.
worse in the sense that, it makes their lives worse and it makes their country more destroyed. So it's horrific.
Yeah.
Sounds like Putin really didn't get smacked enough when he was a little kid. He throws stuff out of the pram and mum didn't lean in and smack him. She just picked the toys up and give him back.
I don't know, mate. You've seen those photos of him shirtless, riding horses. It's a pretty butch sort of
It's
thing.
like, put it away. It's so gross.
I used to do a great joke in my one-man show about Asia. I used to do a great joke. It was just Vladimir Putin doing the Old Spice ad. Look at me. Don't look at Ukraine.
Yeah. It's almost as bad as looking at David in those shorts.
Thank you.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
Look, I could talk to you all day. We'd love to have you back sometime.
Most definitely. I'd love you to come back. Let's talk America.
Yeah.
that'd be
one question.
great. I was there last year. I was there for doing my Fulbright scholarship there. So it's
See, I told you he was a Fulbright scholar.
well, I got that in there as well. I had to double
Someone
down
read
on the
Wikipedia.
I did my research. I didn't read Wikipedia. I went to his Twitter page.
But Wikipedia's too long. No one's got time for
Yeah,
that.
it's, it's
140 characters.
I know.
Yeah, just Wikipedia TLDR. Can't
Yeah.
be. One question, because this is about spies. This podcast isn't about spies. Did you see any sort of instances of intelligence, sort of anything, either Russian or Ukrainian, or any whiffs of intelligence operations that were going on around you inside this theatre of war?
Well, I think one of the things you had to be careful about as a journalist is that you weren't being manipulated by both sides of the information space. So the speed of things coming through and being able to verify them was challenging. So you had to have trusted sources and people that you could verify things with independently. Like, is this legit? Is that video real? Is that? And people did get caught in those sorts of, in those information
The little
warfare.
traps.
Oh, indeed, right? Because the Ukrainians, they've got their own agenda.
Yeah.
And, I'm extremely sympathetic to what's happening there, but at the same time, they're trying to rally the world and, they're cognizant of what journalists are up to. But I think you've seen penetration of journalists. So right now it's very difficult. Or someone has had penetration journalists like Russian spies coming from Italy.
Thinking.
I was like, I just, my eyes glazed over.
Right.
It's been a while. Anyway.
No, but The Italian, there was an Italian journalist who turned out to be a Russian spy, so it's very hard now to get credited as a journalist.
See, that's the problem is journalism, journalists have been used, the cover of journalism.
We're the perfect cover.
Right.
Yeah.
And I nearly got arrested a number of times by the SBU, which is their, I guess their
internal.
Their ASIO equivalent. And
What if they've got a comedian working for them? Oh, they do. It's the
And then did you start talking an Australian accent?
Well, it's funny, right? Because I can speak Russian, I can't speak Ukrainian, so I'd start off in Russian, and sometimes they wouldn't enjoy that. So I'd speak English, and they'd be like, "Well, we can't speak English." So like, well. My Ukrainian's worse than your English and Russian, so what do you want to do? But a lot of the time they'd work it out. It's a funny story. When I went to Kryvyi Rih, which is Zelensky's hometown. I was doing a profile in his hometown.
I read that one.
Yeah, it's just above Crimea. It's like a steel town. It reminded me in many ways of Wollongong's where I grew up.
The Gong.
Yeah, and so it's like any other steel town. It has that kind of same mindset. It's a tough town, a little bit declinist, Rust Belt kind of
I
city.
grew up around in Newcastle area.
Right, okay, so you understand. Same sort of
I'm
vibe.
a Gong boy.
Yeah, and so they, I said, look, I had my fixer rang the local government, said, look, we'd like to speak to anybody who grew up with Zelensky, who knew him, right? So this somehow got lost in translation that there's some foreigner looking for Zelensky. So upturn the SBU, the ASIO guys, and they say, who's looking for the president? Of course, everyone just turns around and points straight at me. That bloke right there. And I'm like, oh, man, all right. So they're like, all right, come with us. So they started looking at my phone, and then they went through, and eventually they worked it out. Like they looked at my stuff and looked at my photos and make sure I didn't have anything that was contraband. And then they said, well, we assume you must be an idiot because anyone that come here looking for Zelensky, everyone knows he's in Kiev, but we thought we'd come check it out anyway, right? So, but otherwise, they are very active out there making sure that because at the beginning, particularly, there were assassination squads and flipped Ukrainians being hired to kill the president, and so they are very, very anxious about spies and also open source intelligence. So
that's really had a huge resurgence,
right? And they ask journalists a lot of the time, don't post videos of things that are happening live because that gives Russians tips because they're watching. When there's a missile strike. So there's a tension between, I would see a missile land, there's an explosion, you get footage of it. Do you show that? Or by posting that to the world, are you letting the Russians know, geez, we didn't hit it, we hit it. And so there is
another one.
Well, there is a tension there. And so the Ukrainian government did slap some journalists around for posting things that were essentially, classified.
Yeah, switch off your geopositioning, please. That was the great story about the Chechen squad that came in, the assassination squad that came in and took photos of themselves crossing into Ukraine going, we're going to get you, without switching off the geopositioning on the shots. The Ukrainians went, this artillery barrage over there, please.
Well, some of the amateur hour nature of Russia's entire military operation has just been extraordinary. From the bottom to the top, it's just been so amateurish. And I think in many ways, one of the big questions we had going into this war was, look, can a military superpower be sustained by an economic middle power? And an unsophisticated one of that, essentially gas and oil economy, they can't because they don't have all the things that go around an army. They don't have all the technicians and all the people that you expect in a modern, like Australia. Yeah. The economy is about the same size, but ours is much more sophisticated than the people that we have here. Whereas theirs are essentially people living off the process. They're almost like Saudi Arabia living off the process of oil and gas.
Exactly.
And so the economy is very unsophisticated. And it's shown that it's unable to provide all the scaffold that you put around a military. It's beyond tanks and planes. You actually need all the people and technicians, et cetera, to support all that.
It's almost like it looked good on paper, but then in real life, everyone went, oh, wait.
The other thing that's really gone badly for the Russians is the fact that the Ukrainians, and because of the Ukrainians now, NATO and the West have got access to their CNCs, their missile guidance. They've literally got the paint off some of the SUs that they go, well, if that's the radar deflecting paint, let's just point a radar at it and keep firing at it till we get a signal, and then we know how to find their planes. Right. So they literally had everything they own as being reverse engineered, and we know how it works. So this great military bear has actually turned out to be a bit of a teddy.
Yeah, that's right, and getting worse because they're running out of their good kit, and that's where the sanctions will really bite them on their supply chains. Everyone's focused on the financial ones, and rightly so, but their inability to, you get these reports that they're pulling apart fridges to get chips out of them. And so, and anecdotally, I've spoken to people on the field of battle who've told me they're shooting down drones and there's like Coke bottles in them and all sorts of weird things that they're using to essentially kind of retrofit these because they're just running out of kit. And so that will wear down the Russians' capability in the short and medium term as well. So that's why that resupply effort of Ukraine is vital.
Yeah.
And maintaining that support politically for it will be a challenge through winter. And I think that's where the war is going to have a big political phase over the next 3 months, where it's going to be relatively quiet in terms of the action on the field. There'll still be fighting, but perhaps not to the degree that we've seen, because it gets harder in the war.
It's bloody cold.
Yeah, and snowy, right? It's good to move tanks, but it's not really good to move people.
Yeah.
But you're going to have Ukrainians, they're going to be freezing, obviously, but Europeans are going to be very cold and paying a lot for oil and gas. And it's not hard to imagine a situation, I wrote about this, where Western support starts to fray. Before the Italian election, before they elected Maloney, who's a right-winger, far right.
Fascist.
A nationalist, it depends how you want to call it.
That's a terrible sneeze.
I know.
But nevertheless, 4 in 10 Italians support lifting sanctions on Russia and lowering their power prices. That was before the war. Before winter.
But
before winter.
We saw that in America too.
Totally.
Like it was in the midterms. That was like their primary response was, we don't want to pay a lot for petrol, because people unfortunately can't see beyond the scope of their own living.
Yeah, well, people are very complicated. Like you can say to someone, "Do you support the war in Ukraine?" Yes, I do. Do you support lower gas prices?
Yes, I do.
And so the cognitive dissonance is someone that works in politics can be very, very frustrating to deal with that. But no, the two things that kill any government are gas and groceries.
Yeah.
And those are going up.
Yeah.
And
everywhere.
And so that is where I think if I was Ukrainian or a big supporter of the effort to support Ukraine, is watching what happens to Western governments in Europe over the next 6 months can be a challenge.
Yeah. Look, we have to hold it there, but you were incredible. So good. I could chat all day. So we'll definitely.
I could talk for Australia.
No, it's great. It's great. It's great. I mean, that's what podcasts are about.
Yeah, right.
Talking. You found the perfect medium for yourself.
That's right.
So did I. That's why.
I know. I can never shut him up. So it was great. I found someone who could shut him up. It's perfect. Thanks so much for being here.
No. Thank you for having me on.
Misha Diplomates.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Yep.
Fin Review.
Yep.
And Fin Review.
Yep.
And of course, you're on Twitter.
I am.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Great.
Twitter and Instagram. If you're no longer like Elon Musk, you can come. Go.
I'm on Instagram, but it's just photos of the beach.
Elon Musk is kind of funny to me. So anyway.
Well, I mean, look, I can't stand him, but it is a good example. Look, there's some joy in watching an idiot blow up $40 billion.
Oh no, it's great.
Right?
It's great. It's actually hilarious. I mean, we all know he overpaid. He paid $44 billion, and it was worth 12. So
how to make $1 million?
Yeah. Buy a tech company. Richard Branson said, become a billionaire and start an airline.
Elon Musk $44 million.
Yeah. Well, I will say, Elon Musk did tweet recently, how do you make a small fortune from a social media company? Start with a big one.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think he's across his idiocy. Thanks for coming.
Cheers.
Thank you very much
for having me.
It was great.
Appreciate it.